Why can't villains be pure evil? Now, if I was making this argument like 10 years ago, I think I would have a much harder time, especially since back then people thought for a villain to be engaging, they needed to be sympathetic, right? A lot of people really endeared themselves to Mr. Freeze because he had a sympathetic origin, right? He's doing everything that he does for his wife. It doesn't make anything that he does excusable, but it makes us understand his character, why he does what he does. If we were able to put ourselves in his shoes, we would maybe do the same thing, right? That's what a lot of people liked with them and characters of the sort, but as time has progressed, we have seen a lot more great performances of pure evil villains. Say somebody like a Homelander, like a Joker, right? And people tend to like forget that a lot of these pure evil villains, they do have tragic backstories as well. And I don't know, something that turned them onto this path, but they just don't care. They do what they do for the love of the game. They just are like that. And I guess before I get into anything of my argument, I want to preface this first. Just because I or anyone else likes or finds a villain fascinating, it does not mean that I engage with or I believe in their ideology or their behavior. I don't know why this has to be said, but a lot of people like to project onto others and they say just because you like a character, you must agree with it, right? For them, the characters that they like, they only like them because they feel like they can relate to them. So they put it back on us and people of the sort, and they're like, you know what? You like this, and this character. That means that you are this, and that, right? And it's just such a weird... I'm just gonna go through this. Okay, let me just talk and say a story, right? Story time. And I'm trying to make this sound way more interesting than it is. It really isn't, but last weekend, I saw Sinners. Peak movie. I'm not gonna let anyone tell me otherwise. Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan, and the sort. Everyone involved in that film, they were in their bag. But what I saw on Twitter, of course, the place that is completely a cesspool, let's be real. On Twitter, what happened was there's this one or a couple, I guess, people that were praising Jack O'Connell, of course, the actor of the main villain, the main vampire, who is Remick, right? People were saying that he did a fantastic acting job. And then there's a lot of people that just piled onto them and was like, dude, if you like this character, you are racist. And I'm like, I'm trying to put two and two together in my head. I'm like, how do you get to this point? Where are you building this straw man argument? Because they just said that they liked his acting. Are we not allowed to like acting anymore? Like, this is what I said before. People assume just because you like a character, you agree with them full-heartedly all the decisions that they do. And it's like, what type of media do you guys watch? Do you guys not like conflict? Do you not like characters with differing ideologies or just villains in general? I feel like in recent memory, there's this sort of limiter on evil. If it goes past a certain point, people feel uncomfortable. But it's like the purpose of films like Sinners is for you to think, for you to feel uncomfortable, but to also understand the level of craftsmanship that goes into creating something like this. I'm not going to let somebody call me certain words just because I think Remick and the actor that played him was fantastic in the film. I don't know where two and two goes together, but some people are just like this. I don't know. This goes on to the argument of what I want to talk about, of course, being villains in comics aren't really allowed to be pure evil, or at least ones that become too popular, right? And people just don't want to sacrifice the likability of a character. So the first one I want to talk about, and the kind of centerpiece of this entire argument, is Deathstroke. Now, Deathstroke as a character is fascinating because people perceive him in two different ways, right? There's one camp who are like, he is aura personified, right? He has a cool costume, the fit is nice. He has great gadgets, he has cool rivalries with characters like Batman, Green Arrow, and specifically Nightwing and the Teen Titans. And overall, he's just cool, right? At the end of the day, let's be honest, the drip is immaculate. But there's another group of people who completely invalidate his character, calling him the P word. I'm not going to say it because I don't know if that word will get me demonetized. It's the PEDOPH. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, when I say that word, I'm going to replace it. Write this down. I'm going to say Drake. Oh, this is so dumb. What am I doing with my life? Okay, but yeah, I'm gonna replace it with Drake. But people call him this word and completely invalidate the entire character just based off of that, even to the point when people are talking about 1v1s or power scaling, their only argument is that he is this, so he can't win. He is that, how could he ever win? Which doesn't really make sense. People just hate on him, I guess for a reason, right? You don't have to like him. Going to like Christopher Priest, who wrote my favorite DC Rebirth run, Deathstroke, which is a phenomenal run. It should have won an Eisner. It was peak. I highly recommend everyone check it out. I know a lot of people at the time when it was first coming out had some sort of difficulty reading it because it followed a non-linear format of storytelling, but as it went on, it really built up a following, and by the end of it, most people, 90% who finish it, really love the book. And the reason why I like it and a lot of other people like it is that it didn't really, it kind of did at certain points, which we'll go through later, but it really didn't hold our hands, and it actually decided to portray Deathstroke as a villain, right? So one thing that he's really good at is pushing people's buttons. He can find their buttons, and yeah, he's a character who wants to be loved, who wants to love, but he's incapable of this. He's somebody who's in his best frame of mind, his best space, when he's taking advantage of others, right? In this book, we saw him sleep with his son's fiance to like killing Power Girl's dog in front of her, and these little like articulate pieces that he's moving on the chessboard that he does to get people either riled up or to follow his lead. He's always been good at this, and honestly, this is what separates him from every other character, right? It creates this little space just for him that makes him unique. If you got rid of this vile aspect to him, he becomes just another antihero, just another Deadpool who doesn't crack jokes. And I guess going into what I want to say, and to set a little groundwork, this little interview that I'm going to talk about from Christopher Priest is talking about the Judas Contract, one of the most famous Teen Titans stories, probably the most famous Teen Titans story, and the stuff that goes on with Terra. And a lot of people like to discredit it, saying that this should never been done, this is character assassination, this is a horrible story, but it's like Wolfman and Perez, they created the character. This happened in the debut book for the character, the New Teen Titans. How can you tell me this is not integral? How can you tell me this was not their thesis on how the character should be? So let's go through it. So here he says, Christopher Priest that is, he says, "This is what I'm asked about most regarding this series, especially by comic readers who remember the Wolfman Perez run. How can you write that, Drake?" It frustrates me a little, I shouldn't be laughing, it frustrates me a little that Deathstroke is so popular these days and actually has always been super popular with the fans, while so many of them decry this, the moment that literally defined who he is. Deathstroke manipulating a young girl is reprehensible. It is kind of unsurvivable in terms of character. You really can't soft pedal the behavior and continue to root for Deathstroke. Any attempt to rationalize the behavior just blows up in your face. Deathstroke's choices are indefensible, but painting Terra as a saint is wrong and stupid. Excusing Deathstroke's behavior is wrong and stupid. Not talking about it leaves this cloud lingering over DC, over Deathstroke, over Marv, over the creators, and the sense that he gets from fans branding him as such is they have this innocent vision of Terra as someone that's Slade corrupted, which really tells a lot of us that they don't understand Terra or Deathstroke as a character, because if you read the original Judas Contract run, you'd realize that as you are, and many of us were disturbed by what happens, Terra was very willing and eager in her participation, in her cooperation. She wasn't 12, and she was basically a contract killer, right? Any sort of innocence that you have in your brain is literally out the window. Terra is not fitting of a halo, it is stupid, but that doesn't excuse Deathstroke's behavior in the slightest, right? It doesn't really make him exempt of the label either, but if you look at the definition, right? What is PEDO blah 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 blah, right? What is that word? It's a person with a sexual attraction to children, and if he was this character, right? If that is who Deathstroke is, Priest would have written him as such, somebody who is struggling with the urges, but he's not that. He's just a vile man, right? He's somebody who didn't really like he couldn't stand Terra to begin with. He was only using her to help him kill the Titans. This goes back to manipulation. That is a key trait to Deathstroke. What Priest says here is that labeling him as such diminishes a very serious threat to children, and a lot of times people would say that term very generically or disparagingly, right, as a very dismissive thing that they throw out there, just a buzzword. But like, if you think about it, when you use that term, it should have some gravity, not something that you spit out of your mouth just because. You have to consider what comes with that word. And what he says here, my regret concerning things that did not make it into my original run, which was your original question, was over 2017 Deathstroke not taking fuller responsibility for 1980s Deathstroke by our not more fully exploring how sexual exploitation impacts at-risk youth. I thought rounding the corners off of the original story was a less courageous choice than holding Deathstroke accountable for his actions and exploring the long-term impact that it had on Tara. If you think about it, why would they prevent Priest from like doing this, right? Who are they protecting? Are they trying to protect? Is DC trying to protect themselves, the fans? Because if you think about it, the people who are reading Deathstroke comics, I can tell you that 98% of them already know the story and they're not little kids. Why are we trying to shave off the edges of somebody who is a vile, reprehensible human being? Priest goes on to say, I'm not sure what good running away from this classic event does. I'd have rather dealt with it head on, exploring the greater ramifications of how this kind of abuse and violation victimizes youth. That's a story worth telling. That's the key point right there. That's a story worth telling. It all goes back to this. A story that could help educate and inform rather than pretending this doesn't actually happen. I wish we hadn't shied away from it. And yeah, when Deathstroke, I guess, like kissed Tara in in Rebirth, he wanted to show how this exploitation can have an emotional scarring, right? How that could affect people. But there was some sort of pushback that he had. He got the Scarlet Letter. He had to fight against like City Hall, right? He had to repeat ad nauseum that Deathstroke is a villain. Slade ends up killing a bear to save his son in the first issue, which is completely fine, right? He's trying to protect his child, but then he goes on to kill the baby cubs because in his mind, he's like, it is harsher, it is more cruel to leave them alive without a mother. That is who Deathstroke is. And the problem that he had with writing Deathstroke is that he had to get very hung up on the character's likability. He really didn't follow that in the slightest if you see all the things that he did. But that was the part that made it hard to write because he had to think about all these things that Deathstroke fans were saying, not even being fully aware of what the character really is. Deathstroke is somebody who has more of an edge than Punisher, than Wolverine. He is a villain, not an antihero. Not that any of this writing, right? He wanted to paint him like this. It doesn't have any sort of negative connotation to like the writers, right? To Marv and George and himself, Priest, who they are. They don't like agree with this behavior. They just wanted a story to talk about harsh reality, right? If these things aren't really spoken about, people tend to think of it as taboo, that it should not be talked about. But if you don't talk about something, how are people going to be aware about it? How are people going to fight against it? And comics as a medium, if it took place even in like a live action or a television format where a lot more eyes are on it, it will get more people thinking. And that is the entire idea that Priest had when talking about this situation. And that's what I think should have happened going forward. But ever since like the post-Priest era, Deathstroke has been watered down. Even when they brought him back to be a villain, he was just generic. What I feared what would happen if they didn't let Deathstroke be the character that he was already supposed to be. Even though somebody like a Joshua Williamson in his Deathstroke run, he made sure to remind fans this is who he is, right? He is somebody who does what has to be done in his mind to get what he wants, even mentioning the Tara debacle. And that is who Deathstroke is. What makes him unique and interesting is that he is, this is my little thesis, he is a character who is a train wreck, a complete car crash of a character, a wreck. But it's so fascinating that we can't take our eyes off of it. He's somebody that we root for, that we see him do all these crazy stuff, like shooting people, doing like using his blade to like cut people into like hundreds of different pieces, doing whatever he's doing, right? And it looks cool, but then he does something so insane that it makes you think, why am I even rooting for the character in general? And the fact that somebody like Deathstroke can have like full-on 50, 60, 70 issue runs exploring someone of this nature is what makes the character different from everybody else. And removing that doesn't do the justice that you think it would do for Slade. It just makes him a worse character. And I guess the next set of characters that I really want to talk about is, let's just talk about Harley Quinn first. Now, Harley Quinn was a character obviously created in Batman the Animated Series by Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, the entire team, and of course the fantastic voice work by Arlene Sorkin. And she was the pinch girl, girlfriend, sidekick of the Joker. And we saw a lot of what a lot of people's first, I guess, exposure to an abusive relationship was, if they had a good household at home, I mean. But that's what that relationship kind of represented, and it honestly makes sense why she was redeemed, but she's become sort of a lesser character ever since then, unfortunately. You'd assume once she branches off of the Joker and she goes her own path, she would like carve out a place for herself, but instead it led to her stealing basically the flow of others. What is this vandalism, bro? What are we doing here? But either way, in like recent years, we've been making her into an anti-hero, but not just an anti-hero. DC's, I guess, equivalent to Deadpool, but the problem with that is they decided to take all the parts that people don't like about Deadpool, at least those who read comics, and forego all the stuff that makes Deadpool cool. For example, the fourth wall breaking, random like plot armor power-ups at times. That's what they decided to hold on to, and everything else, like all like the sad clown or whatever, those types of like aspects of the Deadpool character, they got rid of all of that, or they just didn't bother to even implement it. And while this is fine, I just want to like revert ourselves back to like post-crisis and really think about how they decided to rehabilitate Harley, because New 52 Harley and post-crisis Harley are two different beasts. Because if you think about it, post-crisis had the benefit of having Harley's original writer take place in that field of writers, while the New 52 didn't. So in post-crisis, she was introduced in the 1999 story Batman No Man's Land, which is one of my favorites, and it was during the latter half of Denny O'Neil's tenure as Bat editorial, right? He was the editor throughout all of the 90s and a good portion of the 80s, and a lot of Batman's greatest stories like Nightfall does take place during this time. So because of this, Harley didn't have that much crazy things, I guess, that she's done, right? She's killed a couple people with the Joker, maybe more than just a couple, right? But overall, it is something that she can like step back and come around to. She can turn her life around. So Paul Dini, during his Detective Comics run, what he did was have this one single issue where she was broken out of jail or Arkham Asylum by the new Scarface. Scarface at this point was dead because this was during the latter half of post-crisis. And a new Scarface was a woman. Her name was like Peyton Riley, I'm pretty sure. And she broke her out of Arkham Asylum. At the same time, she was like pleading that she wants to be a better person to the council, to like Bruce Wayne, who's a big funder of Arkham Asylum, to like, of course, like government officials and blah, 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 right? She was pleading her case and they shut her down. And after that, Scarface took her to do this sort of job, gave her a costume and tried to make her do something. But at the end of the story, what happens is that she turned on her, an executive, and made an executive decision to help Batman take her down. And when she was brought back to Arkham, Bruce gave in a good word with the people and she was actually freed, right? And the reason why it was so personal for her to defeat this version of Scarface is that when she first appeared in Arkham Asylum, there's this little excerpt of a panel that I want to read. Let me just go through it. When she first appeared in Arkham Asylum, so she says, "I'll never forget my first week there. Joker was still on the loose, so was Poison Ivy. It was just me alone in the rec room with a guard and a couple of droolers. I was seriously considering hanging sheets from the light of my cell and doing the maximum checkout when I heard this voice." So what she's trying to say is that, yeah, it's hard for the doctors, but also it's really hard for the patients as well, especially if you're not one of the big guys like a Joker, or if you have like powers like a Poison Ivy. And we go on to see Scarface, the original Wesker, put on this little puppet show to kind of cheer her up. And this is like the one person who showed her kindness in this place. So that's why she felt that, and that was the kind of piece that we really need to see, that Harley can be brought back from the brink, right? From being an accomplice to the Joker, right? And this entire sort of redemption arc led to her leading the Gotham City Sirens with, of course, Catwoman and Poison Ivy, and it was this full loop that really made sense. But then once you move on to like the New 52 is when it becomes really strange, because she does things where it's like, okay, that's absolutely insane Joker level stuff, and then we're just gonna backpedal and pretend and pretend like these things didn't happen. At this point, you're so far gone that you shouldn't even be allowed or given the second thought to be redeemed in the slightest. And if you are, it has to be a large, tenuous task for that to happen, and they didn't do that. They just sped ran it because of her popularity, because of how likable she was to the general public. They're like, okay, we can get away with this because people's first comic of Harley is going to be when she's a good guy, and people aren't going to second guess it. But if you're reading it, you realize how crazy this is, because in a Detective Comics, not really annual, but it's a special villain issue during the Forever Evil era when they were doing one-shots for each villain of every character's rogues gallery. And what happens here is that we learn that she installed explosive devices onto consoles, video game consoles for kids, and blew up an untold number of kids. And then like the next year or so, then she goes to being a literal hero. And it's like, who balances these scales? How did we let this happen? DC, you allowed a writer to publish this. How are you going to let that happen? And then Amanda Connor's run, or whoever's run going forward, you have her acting as if this never happened, having the heroes around her act like this never happened. Yes, they show some sort of contempt towards Harley, but they don't bring this up. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's like there's some sort of logical dissonance when I see this happen, because you should have just kept her as a villain, right? The moment you try to position her as a hero after doing these horrible acts, it just doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, let's talk about Red Skull. Now, as Twitter does, as I've talked about before, since they have so many stupid arguments on there, but Red Skull was spoken about in this Marvel Rivals context, right? People wanted to see Red Skull in Marvel Rivals, which is perfectly understandable. He's Captain America's greatest foil. The dialogue that he would have with Captain America, Winter Soldier, even like Magneto would be incredibly fascinating to see. And his moveset can be really cool, right? If you want to do any sort of like Hydra weaponry, maybe the Cosmic Cube, all of that just seems mad nice, right? But people are like, okay, you want him to be in Marvel Rivals? Are you a Nazi? Like, it's like, it goes back to the same thing. Just because I like or I find a character fascinating or I find their rivalries fascinating, it doesn't mean that I agree with their ideology. Who was the genius who thought that this was a right way to think about like debates? Like, this is such a, how do you even win arguments with these people? Because they're so closed-minded and in their own world that it's impossible to talk to them. If you even look at like Lego Marvel Superheroes, that was a game for kids. And it also had Red Skull and nobody complained, but a game for teenagers and adults, a game that should have people of a higher like cerebral caliber, you would think that everyone would notice, okay, not only is it just a game, it's just comics, and it's literally just a character that people find like very iconic, as the main villain of one of the biggest superheroes in the world. But the fact that they can't put two and two together, it's like, dude, what are we doing here? Like, come on. Let's talk about Red Hood and Black Manta. Black Manta is very interesting because he was exposed to this mystical Atlantean metal, right? And because of this, he went through extreme pain, and it led to him fully contemplating everything that happened in his life. The magical properties basically took him down the timeline of what he's done, and he had a change to heart. They went through this entire process during the Aquaman miniseries and the Black Manta miniseries, which is funny. Aquaman was in this weird period where people didn't want to give him any books, but they wanted to write the character. People wanted to write the character, but they didn't want to give him an ongoing, so they kept producing minis. This is before Jeremy Adams came on the book. They had all of this connection between him and Aquaman, and him trying to fully reconcile with his son, Calder. If you watch Young Justice, you know what I'm talking about. But it's like, at the end of the day, I see these two, Aquaman and Black Manta, interacting and just vibing with each other, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Aquaman killed his father, and Black Manta killed a baby child. His baby child. That's still canon. They made sure to mention it later on, or maybe even in a different run. But if it was in the same run, that is some vile, crazy writing, bro. But that just seems so out of character. Aquaman would just hate him. And even Black Manta, his entire thing is being one of the greatest haters of all time. How does this work? Red Hood was really fascinating when he was a sort of like anti-villain type of character, doing like the worst things for the quote-unquote right reasons. You can't defeat crime, so he was like, you know what, I'm going to control it. And that was kind of what his ideology was, but it was also sort of a cover-up for how insane he really is, all the death and destruction that he's done, all the things that he's done to Batman, literally laughing in his face when a nuke was dropped onto Bloodhaven, literally saying, "Isn't it ironic how one son exits the grave, another enters?" Literally taunting Batman with the death of Nightwing and Bloodhaven when the nuke went off. And to even like almost killing Damian Wayne, shooting him in the chest, stabbing Tim Drake. All of this stuff, not only him being positioned as Dick Grayson, Batman's arch nemesis, which Grant Morrison was trying to do, not only was that an interesting like status quo, the fact that we had it for such a little period of time before they went to like the New 52 is so mind-boggling to me, because not only was that the best period in Red Hood's career, because look at it now, look at Red Hood now, he hasn't had a good story in his name since Rebirth, and even then, he had to rely on his teammates, right? The dynamic between him, Bizarro, and Artemis, he hasn't had a good solo run since Under the Red Hood, probably. It's such a shame considering how well he was written then and how much of a shell of his character he is now. And what's really goofy to me is the fact that Batman, just like Green Lantern, was like everything is in canon, because those two franchises, Batman and Green Lantern, were so successful, they kept their chronology, right? They were able to maintain a lot of the history from pre-Flashpoint into the New 52 to the present day. And that just tells me all the vile stuff that he did, everyone remembers it, but when they're written, writers pretend that it never happened. So it's like, you make more problems for yourself by making villains not pure evil as they were intended to be. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. And tell me down below, what are your favorite pure evil villains? What are your favorite pure evil villain moments? Maybe some of your hated character redemptions of all time. Remember to leave all of that down below. And yeah, see you all later. Take care.